Welcome to the deep dive. You've been asking about it, and today we're diving into a fascinating challenge. How do we actually transition towards a society built on, well, AI-assisted direct democracy, a truly fair economy, and policies that really prioritize our well-being? It can feel like a huge leap to imagine.
It really can. And as our sources highlight, you're right to think it's a complex undertaking. This isn't about an overnight transformation, not at all.
Right.
The material we've examined really emphasizes a step-by-step evolution. Our mission, I guess, in this deep dive is to extract those practical first steps, those initial pilot programs that could lead us towards that future vision in a stable way through what the sources call iterative reform.
Exactly. It's not a sudden revolution we're exploring, but a carefully considered progression. So where do these ambitious ideas start to take hold in a tangible way, on the ground?
Well, the material strongly advocates for starting with small-scale pilot programs. They actually refer to them as laboratories of democracy.
Laboratories of democracy, okay.
Yeah. The idea is to test key elements in controlled local settings before considering, broader implementation. Think of it as running carefully designed experiments to see what works, what doesn't, and crucially, why.
Okay, so what kind of experiments are we talking about? What do these labs actually look like?
One important area is boosting direct citizen involvement in decision-making through, they call them citizen assembly trials.
Citizen assemblies?
Yeah, these are essentially groups of randomly selected people who come together to discuss and find solutions for specific local issues.
Randomly selected, almost like jury duty, but for community problem solving, that kind of thing.
Precisely. And the sources give us some compelling real-world examples. Paris held a citizens' assembly focused on the rollout of 5G technology.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and even more notably, East Belgium has established a permanent citizens' council. So the core insight here is testing if everyday citizens, given the right context, can actually govern effectively, perhaps bypassing some traditional political gridlock.
That's really interesting. So the aim isn't just to gather more opinions, it's to see if these randomly chosen groups can make informed, well-reasoned decisions that earn the trust of the wider public. Is that it?
Exactly. That's the hope. By observing citizens engage in this thoughtful way, public confidence in direct democratic methods will hopefully grow. And if these local assemblies demonstrate success, well, their responsibilities could expand and other areas might adopt similar models.
See it to believe it almost. Okay,
Yes.
what's another area where we can see these initial tests happening?
Another promising avenue is setting up digital democracy platforms, specifically at the city level. Imagine online spaces where residents can propose ideas for local rules and then vote on them directly.
Right, we've seen some initial attempts at online petitions and things like that. How is this different in terms of, impact?
Well, the scale and the direct link to actual policy change are probably the key differentiators. The material highlights Seoul's Democracy Seoul platform.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
And Madrid's Decide Madrid as examples where thousands of citizens have actively participated in shaping local policies online. So we're seeing how these initial steps build trust and engagement, locally.
Thousands actively involved. That's significant. It's not just online chatter. It's about real potential to shape their communities.
Precisely. And starting at the city level allows for more manageable technical aspects, things like verifying identities, moderating discussions, that sort of thing.
Right.
And when people see their online input directly lead to tangible improvements, like, say, a new park being built based on their votes, that significantly builds trust in the process, and it gets people more comfortable with more frequent civic participation.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've talked about citizen assemblies and digital platforms. What about the more cutting-edge ideas around AI and these new economic models? How do we start experimenting with those?
Good question. The concept of local GLSS nodes and civic coin experiments offers a way to explore those areas. Think of GLAS as a framework for collaborative problem solving, potentially with AI tools to analyze data, suggest solutions.
Okay.
And civic coins are envisioned as a digital, community-specific currency that rewards participation. So the idea here is to create small-scale versions of this collaborative system, the nodes, where citizen teams work on community projects, maybe with AI assistance, and then a basic civic coin system rewards their contributions.
A mini economy specifically for civic engagement. Is that the idea?
That's the essence, yeah. The material even suggests trying this out in a focused environment like a university governance game,
Right.
where students propose and decide on campus policies using this model. The key is that controlled environment, a small town, an NGO, a university campus, to really study how people interact with the system.
And this civic coin doesn't have to be a complex cryptocurrency right away, does it? Seems like that would be a hurdle.
No, not at all. That's a really important point. The material suggests early pilots might just use a simplified point system, simply to observe how people participate, how fair the system feels, and if there are any, unexpected negative consequences.
Right, keep it simple first.
Exactly. For instance, volunteers might earn points for completing tasks and then use those points to influence a community decision, like maybe where a charitable donation goes. It's really about understanding the core mechanics before jumping into complex blockchain technologies. Essentially, we're exploring a system where contributing to the community directly translates to having a voice in its future.
That makes perfect sense. Start simple, learn, and then build up the complexity. Okay, what about the economic side? The ideas around universal basic income and more equitable distribution of resources.
Those are also ideal for continued and expanded pilot programs. The material points to the valuable data already collected from basic income experiments in places like Finland and Canada.
Right, I remember reading about those.
Yeah, indicating potential improvements in well-being without necessarily causing widespread reluctance to work, which is often a big concern.
And the goal is to build on that knowledge then, to fine-tune the approach.
Exactly. More pilots, maybe at the city or even state level, can help us figure out the most effective ways to implement UBI things, like how payments are made, how it interacts with our current tax system, all that detail. The material also emphasizes the growing importance of participatory budgeting, which is actually already happening in many cities. This gives citizens direct control over how portions of public funds are spent, demonstrating a more equitable approach to resource allocation.
So we're seeing these local initiatives, these on-the-ground experiments. But how do we scale these up to have a meaningful impact nationally? That's where the legal and constitutional changes come into play, right? That seems like a huge step.
Absolutely. And the material emphasizes a gradual approach here, too, acknowledging that these are, well, highly sensitive areas. The idea isn't to dismantle everything and start anew overnight,
Right.
but to introduce changes step by step.
Okay, let's get into specifics then. How do we slowly integrate more direct democratic bodies into our existing political structures?
One strategy is the incremental introduction of sortition bodies, those randomly selected citizen assemblies we talked about earlier.
Right.
Instead of immediately replacing existing legislatures, the idea is to begin by creating parallel or advisory bodies.
Like a citizens advisory group that provides input to the government, kind of like that?
Something along those lines, yeah. The material offers the example of a national citizens chamber that would exist alongside the current legislature.
Right.
Initially, its role could be purely advisory, reviewing proposed laws, suggesting amendments. The hope is that lawmakers would voluntarily take their recommendations seriously, particularly if they reflect broad public sentiment.
So influence through expertise and public backing initially.
Exactly. And over time, if this citizens' chamber proves its value and gains public trust, its authority could be gradually formalized and expanded, perhaps even down the line, eventually replacing an upper house of parliament.
That's a compelling idea. A slow but steady evolution of legislative power.
Okay. What about giving citizens more direct influence through things like referendums?
The material suggests a gradual introduction of citizen-initiated referenda as well. This could begin at the local level, allowing citizens to petition for votes on specific community issues. If that proves successful, it could then be expanded to the national level for constitutional amendments or other significant questions.
But there's always a potential risk with referendums, isn't there? The possibility of them being influenced by misinformation or fleeting popular trends. The source material also highlights potential downsides, right? Like tyranny of the majority concerns. How do these pilot programs address those concerns?
That's a crucial point, absolutely. And the material addresses it by emphasizing the importance of deliberative components. So it's not just a straight vote. Okay, what does that mean, deliberative components?
Well, it could involve requiring a citizen jury, another randomly selected group, to help draft the referendum question to ensure it's clear and neutral. or mandating the dissemination of unbiased, comprehensive information to voters beforehand.
Ah, I see. Building in checks and balances.
Precisely. The aim is to ensure these direct initiatives are well-informed and carefully considered, not just impulsive reactions. And as people become more accustomed to this form of direct input, the demand for it in more areas is likely to grow.
Now, if we're talking about a future where these civic coins play a role in governance, that's going to necessitate some significant changes to how our political system is funded, right? Campaign finance, lobbying.
Absolutely, that's a huge piece. The current systems of campaign finance and lobbying would need substantial reform to make space for something like civic coins to actually have influence.
So what are the first steps there?
The material suggests starting with stricter limits on campaign donations, moving towards publicly funded elections to reduce reliance on wealthy donors, and much, much greater transparency in lobbying activities.
Gradual steps towards a more level playing field, then.
Exactly. Each of these reforms gradually diminishes the outsized influence of money in politics. And the long-term vision, as direct democracy becomes more established, is that traditional campaigning might even become less crucial as continuous citizen participation takes precedence over periodic elections.
Interesting. And how do we actually establish civic coins as a legitimate part of this new governance model from a legal perspective? You can't just invent a currency and expect it to have power.
No, you're right. That would necessitate specific laws recognizing their role. The material provides a couple of interesting possibilities here.
Like what?
One is legislation requiring government agencies to consider proposals with strong civic coin endorsement as carrying a kind of public mandate. Another idea is to formally establish a civic budget, a portion of public funds directly controlled by citizen decisions, weighted by their earned civic coins. It's sort of like participatory budgeting, but using this new mechanism. Of course, one source we looked at did raise concerns about potential manipulation or inequality in such systems. How do these early pilots try to mitigate those risks?
Right. So it's about giving those earned civic credits real weight, real teeth in the decision-making process.
Precisely. Early legal recognition might even be symbolic at first, simply acknowledging civic coins as a form of civic reward. But the ultimate goal, the material suggests, could be constitutional recognition of something like a right to direct influence on legislation through earned civic credits.
Wow.
Essentially enshrining influence based on demonstrated contribution, not just wealth or connections.
That's a fundamental shift.
Okay.
And what about the other branches of government, the executive, the judiciary? How do they adapt to this more direct form of democracy?
They would also need to evolve, definitely, to accommodate increased citizen oversight alongside these more direct legislative functions. For the executive branch, the material mentions expanding the concept of citizen oversight committees for government ministries, or even for supervising powerful AI systems down the line, like AGGIA.
Okay.
These could begin as experimental citizen audit groups attached to a few departments, operating with very transparent processes, and then potentially expand if they prove effective.
So greater accountability and direct citizen input into how government agencies actually operate day to day.
Exactly. And the judiciary could also see experiments with incorporating citizen input, perhaps through citizen observers and judicial appointments, or even sortition-based judicial review panels for certain types of cases, building upon existing models like lay judges in some countries.
Interesting.
Again, these would need to be phased in, probably one institution at a time, requiring the necessary legal framework as they develop.
This all points to a significant but gradual transformation. But what if these new systems encounter challenges? I mean, what if there are unforeseen negative consequences? It seems risky.
That's where the idea of parallel institutions and safety nets becomes really crucial. The material strongly advises running new systems alongside existing ones for a period
Okay.
to provide a safety net and, importantly, to build confidence.
Can you give me a concrete example of how that might function, a parallel system?
Sure. Imagine a parallel digital legislature. Every time the actual parliament passes a law, it's also put to an online citizen vote, but in a non-binding sort of mock capacity initially.
Ah, okay.
If significant and consistent differences arise between the parliamentary vote and the citizen vote over time, those discrepancies can be carefully analyzed to understand the reasons behind them. Why are citizens thinking differently?
So it's like a trial run for the new system, a way to identify potential issues early on without blowing things up.
Precisely. And over time, If the citizen votes consistently demonstrate sound judgment, there could be a move towards legally requiring citizen approval for certain types of decisions.
I see.
The material also mentions piloting a civic coin economy within a limited group, like government employees or maybe volunteers for a specific project, while the traditional lobbying system continues in parallel.
Right.
This parallel approach provides that safety net and allows for learning and adjustments before any wider implementation. It's a strategy that has historical precedent, actually. It's similar to how nations have transitioned to new currencies or measurement systems. You run both for a while.
All of this sounds very promising, maybe even necessary, but it hinges on the public actually understanding and supporting these changes. How do we cultivate that widespread buy-in? That seems like a massive hurdle.
It is, and that necessitates a significant civic education campaign. The material outlines several key components for this.
Okay, like what?
One is updating school curricula, teaching students about direct democracy tools, critical thinking skills, and the principles of a more equitable economy from a young age.
Educating the next generation to be active participants from the start.
Absolutely. But it's not just about young people. We also need public forums, town halls, and deliberation exercises to help current citizens become comfortable with dialogue and collective decision-making.
Making it less intimidating.
Exactly. These could start with less controversial local issues to build confidence and skills first, make civic engagement less intimidating and more accessible for everyone.
Yeah.
The material also suggests engaging the media. Imagine, say, a popular reality TV show or a documentary series that follows a small community experimenting with these new governance rules.
Huh. That could work.
That kind of visibility could really capture public imagination and spark widespread discussion. And crucially, there needs to be complete transparency and honesty throughout the entire process. Meaning openly sharing the results of pilot programs, even the failures, especially the failures, to demonstrate responsible and adaptive management of the transition.
Okay, own the mistakes.
Yes. And finally, building alliances with civil society organizations, with forward-thinking businesses, can help champion different aspects of the model and create a broader coalition for change.
Okay, so we're experimenting, reforming, running parallel systems, educating the public. But we can't ignore the reality that there will be individuals and groups who resist these changes, particularly those who benefit from the current system. How do we address that inevitable resistance?
That's a critical question, and the material offers several strategies. One is, interestingly, co-optation.
Co-optation.
Yeah, involving existing power holders in the transition process so they feel a sense of ownership, or at least less threatened.
How would that work?
For example, encouraging reform-minded politicians to lead citizen assembly initiatives, or engaging businesses by highlighting the long-term advantages of more equitable policies, things like more stable markets, a better educated workforce, maybe even reduced social unrest.
Appealing to their longer-term interests, perhaps, or enlightened self-interest.
Precisely, exactly. Another strategy is just a gradual shift in power. Instead of abruptly stripping current power holders of their authority, the idea is to progressively make them more accountable to the new structures.
Okay.
So as citizen oversight expands, elected officials still hold their positions, but they're subject to greater scrutiny. As civic coins gain influence, lobbyists can still interact with officials, but those officials also need to consider the transparent input from the broader citizenry. It changes the game slowly.
It's about evolving the system rather than a sudden upheaval. Makes sense.
Exactly. Legal protection is also vital, enshrining key reforms, especially those that might threaten established interests, through things like constitutional amendments or broad public mandates via referendum, can make them much harder to reverse later on.
Locking in the changes.
Yeah, and diversifying power centers through decentralization also makes it more difficult for any single entity to kind of control the entire system or block progress.
And ultimately, real-world success will be the most convincing argument, won't it?
Yeah.
If these things actually work.
Absolutely. The material really emphasizes that. Early successes, a citizen assembly effectively resolving a long-standing political deadlock, maybe a UBI pilot demonstrably reducing poverty without crashing the economy, those will be the most powerful ways to build public support and overcome resistance.
Proof is in the pudding.
Exactly. And as one country or community successfully navigates these transitions, it will likely create a strong reinforcing effect, inspiring others to follow suit. Global observers will be watching.
We also need to consider the global context, though, don't we? Issues like capital flight, international competition.
Yeah.
If one country changes radically, others might react negatively.
Yes, definitely. And the material acknowledges those challenges. The proposed solutions mostly involve international cooperation, things like global dialogues and treaties on issues like a global minimum tax, which is actually already under discussion, as you know.
Right.
Building international normative pressure around more equitable models is also important. And the material even suggests potential pilot collaborations between countries,
Like what?
like linking civic coin systems across borders, maybe, or conducting joint citizen assemblies on transnational issues like climate change or pandemics. These could be foundational steps towards more direct democratic global governance way down the road.
So it's a really comprehensive strategy then, addressing everything from tiny local pilot projects right up to international collaboration.
Exactly. The journey towards this transformed society, while it sounds incredibly ambitious, is envisioned as a deliberate, iterative process. It's about learning from those small-scale implementations, carefully, gradually adapting our legal and political frameworks,
Right.
running parallel systems for security and learning, educating the public constantly, and strategically addressing resistance when it pops up. And building public trust through those demonstrable successes is just, well, it's fundamental for any long-term sustainability.
So as you're listening, maybe consider this. Which of these proposed transition strategies strikes you as the most practical or maybe the most potentially impactful in your own community or nation? It really prompts you to think about the tangible steps involved in building potentially a very different kind of future. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.